Non-monetary.
Let's see. Yeah. You're in tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
Just want to talk to you about the midterm evaluation thing.
Okay.
And I can do it right now. I'm actually thinking, we tend to get on the evaluation side of it, and I've looked at, what we've got in the policy and stuff, and it really says this is a time to give feedback on what the goal priority. It's not, and there aren't any evaluation kind of concerns or something. So I'm going to I'm taking a sense into the board saying this is where our goals are. This is a time to talk. Make sure Oliver understands where we are. And if we got changes,
We need to
then
recalibrate.
we need to we can't pull this at the end kind of thing. But that's what I'm thinking. I don't see us getting into that.
I agree.
Piece, and I try to get it done. Actually, my goal would be to get something before the end of the year. I think the policy
that's
says
something,
the end of January or something, but if we just get that out of the way, it's like this stuff. I mean, really crazy.
It's like the most. I'll tell you, I thought Friday was bizarre. Then Monday just. What are these people thinking? Anyways.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know you're coming. Just want to man my backlog.
Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education to order. This is our study session for the month of November. The board started an executive session at 6:30, talking about negotiated contracts, and this is our open public session. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have a what looks like a short agenda, and I think it will be, but it's really an important meeting. I always look forward to where we're going on our enrollment forecast and hearing from the experts, and we'll do that tonight. This is a study session meeting design. Oh, I didn't ask for an approval of the agenda. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Bob, second. Naomi, all those in favor? Thank you. So this is a study session meeting designed for the purpose of having administrative updates to the Board of Education. No public comments at these sessions. Residents may attend the next scheduled business meeting on December 5th and or contact the board via boe@shenet.org with any comments or questions. All questions come into the Office of Public Information Officer are shared by the board or the superintendent as appropriate. Policy questions, concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational questions and concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent or designee. And we'll go directly to superintendent's comments and to our presentations.
Sure. My first comment is, first of all, happy Thanksgiving to all. It's a great time of the year for people to be with family and really appreciate the things that's most important. This quality time with those you love most. So hopefully whatever you're doing, happy Thanksgiving to all of you. This is also an interesting time of year for us as a school system because, when the weather changed, time changed, go into the holiday season, mindset change, but it's also a critical time. We're getting ready to gear for the budget process pretty heavily. Some other things on the table. So it's always kind of like one of those kind of things, how we balance the emotions with the practicality and the needs of the job as well. So pretty exciting. I don't necessarily have any specific update other than the things we're going to talk about here tonight as well. So I'll just jump right into the presentation, ask Mr. Amelia to come forward to introduce the enrollment forecast, and we'll go from there, and I'll offer some comments as we go along. You open this one, Bob? Yeah, open it on this here.
Yeah. So you remember, Dan, this is Dan's 4th year presenting for Cactus Regional Planning. So he has handouts for you, and
Perfect.
have an extra copy for you. Okay, well, year number 4. Thank you for having me back. Much appreciated. I like that, the expert. I will take that back to my boss. Good. 4 years and I still get nervous. I don't know why. Anyways, so moving on. CDRPC, you're mostly at this point familiar with who I am, what we do. We serve the Fort County area. I won't even get into that at this point. Let's jump right into it this year. Got some nervous energy I got to work out a little bit. I hope you don't mind me. All right, so we have, I changed up the presentation a little bit this year. So we're going to look at the actual and enrollment as opposed to the projected enrollment, the enrollment trends, birth data, housing data, and the meat of the argument, the actual enrollment projections. Okay, so the actual enrollment projections, we were very pleased this year with these numbers. We could not have asked for a better year, not to toot our own horn, but I'm going to. With a total enrollment of 9828, we were only off by 26 students for a difference of 0.3%. This will probably go down in our books as one of our better years that we've had and be an example for how we move forward with our projections. If we look around, we see that we were only off for the cohorts. The worst was 1.4% for middle school with, what was it, 33 kids. So again, very pleased with all that. As individual grades, we see that we were not off by more than 3% for any of the individual grades. The worst was, again, 20 students for second grade, off by 2.8%. So again, this is really a testament to doing Shen for so many years and for having a really good foundation for how to build up on our projections. Begin to look at the trends a little bit, and again, this is data that you've all seen before, but it's worth rehashing. This is your 20-year total enrollment trend, and what you see here is that you had a peak of enrollment in 2008 with around 9,800 kids, a little over 9,800 kids in your district. Since then, enrollment's come down a little bit, but to a valley there, if you want to call it that, in 2013. But really, you're only looking at a difference of a couple percentage points. Shen breaks the mold for every other school district in the region. And most districts that I work with, all districts that I work with, have seen steady declines since reaching an enrollment peak, usually in the late 90s. So your decline, if you can even call it that, is very modest by regional standards. And again, the second half, or the last couple years, enrollment has really rebounded quite well to, you're only a couple students off of your all-time peak. And that actually is an interesting point. Bob provided me some new data this year. Typically, we've only looked at the last 30-ish years of your data, your enrollment data, and that's been fine and good for our normal projections. But we're trying to look farther back to get an idea of how enrollment changes between generations, and that requires more history. He provided me data going back to the, what was it, the early 60s? 55. And most districts see if they reached an all-time enrollment peak in the late 60s, early 70s with the baby boomers. But Shen, this is your all-time peak right here. You've never had higher enrollment. You had a peak in 1970, but this is actually your highest enrollment of all time. So it just speaks to how unique of a situation you have. Kindergarten enrollment, don't want to make too much out of this. You had recently had a decline in the last 4 or 5 years, pretty stable enrollment, around 550 to 580 kids per year. Again, down from your peak about 10 years ago or 8 years ago, and a pretty significant decline. But in recent history, it's stabilized quite well. Your elementary school enrollment hit a peak, had a very sharp peak in 2008, 09, with, what was it, about 4,500 kids, a little over 4,500 kids, and it had a very steep drop off in the last 10 years or so. But in the last couple of years, rebounded again. So these steep declines are not unusual. Again, you know, take for what it is, a couple percentage points, you know, a couple, 20 kids here, 40 kids there, looks very dramatic on charts like this. But overall,
Does it have anything to do with, we were talking earlier, and you were talking about the economic situation at the time, so more people coming back into public school from private school. I mean, the year was, it looks like it could be that reason. I'm not really sure. Have you looked to see what could be driving that?
you know, I can't go back and explain what would do a peak like that. It could be something as simple as, you know, 08, 09, you're right. Maybe it might match up with the recession. Parents took their kids out of private schools and put them into public school. It's a good working theory. I can't prove it one way or the other.
We see, Neil, because we track separately private parochial students, and we see the shift, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's significant and dramatic, but we can tell because not only we see numbers, but we also have parents come and tell us back, hey, I'm bringing my kid back because of economic circumstances in some cases. So, but in many cases, a lot of the parents who send a kid to private parochial, economics is a part of it, but it's often other factors, such as, you know, we get a lot of, my kid is not playing sports here, my kids get a chance to play sports there, and I'm willing to pay whatever price to keep my kid happy, or religious reasons, and that's what we believe in, and that's what we invest in. So we don't see it large, but we have seen some of that impact, but I wouldn't call it anything so sizable that would impact our overall enrollment, because I think right now probably about 900 kids in private parochial.
Around 1,000.
In private parochial, so, and that number's been fairly stable over the past several years.
You could lay the two on top of each other.
Dan, you
If
do,
you have been or bigger.
Dan, you do track, you do track birth rates, right? I mean, there's all kinds of factors that fit
Right.
into this, right? And
Right.
if fewer kids born or at a particular time, it's going to have an impact down the road.
Sure. I mean, a spike like that, which is pretty dramatic, tells me it's going to be an assorted issues that all converge at
All
one
at the same
point
time, yeah.
by happenstance.
Yep.
Because we don't see anything at birthday that would highlight that happening.
Yep.
That's pretty unique. And if we go back one,
Yep, hold on one second, Dan.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, we've seen in the United States a pattern of deferred marriage and childbearing. Are we witnessing some of that with the decline, other than the economic factor?
well, we'll get into birth data in a minute, but the capital region is not immune to the same trends that we're seeing nationwide. Now, no one's done a study of the four-county region, but as a general rule, it's pretty true that women are waiting until later to have kids, and they're having fewer kids. So yes, but again, I'm not sure that explains that.
Right, right.
And if we go back one to I can go back one.
Kindergarten one, yeah.
Yeah, if we go back one to that kindergarten data, I don't think we see a corresponding spike in
We don't.
08. So it would be interesting. That by itself could be a whole research project trying to figure out why that happened.
I mean, it helps to plan to be able to explain things like this, anomalies like this, if it truly is an anomaly or not. But
The fact that you have that sharp spike, you have that 1 year, it's almost like the point on the top of the helmet, is it not indicative of the trend.
Yeah.
The trend are the two sides on
Anomaly,
either
yeah.
Yep.
point.
I agree.
And that kind of gives you a better feel for what the numbers really
Sure.
are at that time.
Good.
And the last bit, if I didn't say already, the last couple of years you've seen a little bit of rebound in enrollment in elementary school. Middle school, this is always a very interesting one because it's been so dramatic. The last table we saw a decline in enrollment through K through 5, and for a number of years those declines had not matriculated up into middle school. But year to year, from last year to this year, we saw a 5.5% decline in enrollment in the middle school cohort. While that was not a surprise considering the projections, it did end up being one of the steepest year-to-year declines in the 30 some odd years that we have enrollment data, grade enrollment data for you. So that just tells us that those small class sizes from 2011, 2012 or so have finally made their way up into middle school, and it's going to have that ripple effect throughout the enrollment. This is a simple story. Your high school does not stop growing. So from 98 to 2016, you see almost, or 17, you see almost no decline in enrollment. It's almost universally growth, and with an all-time peak occurring just this year in enrollment.
This cohort's year-to-year survival rate probably has less to do with the enrollment in high school than perhaps in migration of families with older children.
Well, we always see a big jump from 8th and 9th grade.
Yeah. And that's where the private school effect happened. You see a lot of people bring the kids back to 9th grade. Homeschool effect, a lot of those things when the college option become the focus, kids come back to the school environment.
It almost looks like they check out in middle school. You see a high enrollment in elementary school, the numbers drop in middle school because we're looking at the whole lot. Although there's 6 grades in elementary, so as far as looking at the comparing apples to apples, then my question is there a drop off in middle school or no?
Middle school kind of mirrors some of the, back to Dan's point. For instance, the low enrollment back in 11, we're starting to see low enrollments now coming in 6th grade. So middle school has a tendency to see that, but we see. Well, I think you have the cohort survival one in here, or you didn't put that sheet in here this
The
year.
multipliers, no, we did not put in this year.
So there are multipliers that we look at, and you kind of tell which years have a higher propensity to see the negative prior years impacting it. But the high school, a lot of in-migration. Back to Gary's point, a lot of kids coming into the system. Anecdotally, because I don't think Bob has ran anything yet, if we start looking at number of families that are new to the district in comparison to years, I would venture to guess that we are seeing more, particularly at high school level, we're seeing more families because when people make decisions to move, that's one of the big factors. They don't want to move when their kid is already in high school. So they try to come either 8th grade or move into 9th grade to create that cohort experience for their kids. And so we're seeing that. So it's something that at some point, again, we don't want to be on a research study for curiosities, but we know the in-migration impact is always something at the high school. And I think this point is something that right now, this is our piece that we're looking at. We're looking at a 3-year piece that can be moving forward, is to see how we start mitigating some of the class size implications at high school. Because this high school is feeling it right now, and high school has been feeling it for the past 3 years, and will continue to feel it for the next 3.
High school enrollment was at its lowest point in recent years in 1994. Class of 1994 was about 515 students. Starting with the class of 95, it began to go back up. And you can see Dan's charts reached to 98. It's been going back up since 1995. The other thing about the middle school, too, to remember is it's just 3 grade levels.
Right.
So it's the smallest cohort, so changes in there will be a little bit more magnified. High school has 4 years, of course, the elementary schools have 6 years in their cohort.
Are we seeing perhaps a maturation of the families moving in as housing prices go up? If you have more affordable houses, you have younger families, they're the ones that have the younger children.
That's a great question. When we look at new housing construction, we can use demographic multipliers to try and gauge and estimate how many children will be produced or will be generated in those homes. And part of the factor, so cool calculating. Part of that calculation does factor in the value of the home. And like you said, the higher the value, typically the older the child will be that comes from that housing stock. We also look at existing home sales, but that's a much more difficult measurement to try and get an idea of if you're going to get children out of that house, if they're from outside the district. That's a harder nut to crack on that one.
Dan, in your final report, will you have some of that information on the housing in the
Absolutely.
region? Okay, so you'll see some of that once we get the final report. One of the things, we're just trying to keep the focus for today on the enrollment side of the things, but you'll have that, because we'll use that at some point in the spring, some of the information, when we reconvene the Futures Committee. We're going to look at some of that again to see where the housing stock's going, and we'll invite the town planners and kind of get their inside scoop on the numbers, so to speak.
I think the next one is about housing. Nope, next one is birth data. So, as we can see right here, as we were just discussing, the district's birth rate really peaked in the early aughts, with 760 kids, children being born in 2004. Since that time, the number of births per year within the school district has declined significantly. And other than this little bump up right here in 13 and 14, we've seen almost a universal decline in the number of births, with a dramatic decline in 2015. 2015, by the way, is the most recently available data. So now, in our previous projections from last year, we did not anticipate such a low number of births. So this will definitely have a ripple effect that we can talk about when we get to the actual projections. But the trend line for this is unmistakable, that to our point earlier, births are declining district-wide.
So how does that look regionally? Is that you seeing some significant trends regionally in birth rates?
Yes, birth rates regionally are declining. I will say this is one of the more dramatic ones. But
So we probably need to take the signs down that we have on the Northway.
Is the average age of the resident going?
Not a funny joke, I'm sorry. I offended somebody out there somewhere.
yes, it is going up.
Get an email for some more.
Just anecdotally, I walked out of my house the other day, and for whatever reason, I took like a quick inventory. In the 6 most immediate houses, they're all empty nesters. 12 people in 6 big houses.
Right.
But that's probably the biggest fear we have, Gary, right now in the system. I call it the Van Patten developments. When, it's not an if, when those developments and houses start turning over, we're going to have, because one, they're affordable, just period, and they're particularly affordable for their size.
Yeah.
So when you start talking about families, the good thing about it, this region and the school district remains very attractive for seniors to live in the region. And so people still want to stay here versus picking up and moving, so to speak, as much as sometimes people talk about flight. I don't think we see a lot of flight from this region because of the senior population is pretty consistent, if not growing, and that's why I see a lot of, just look at what's being developed. There's more housing being developed for the senior population than not, and so those kind of things make the school district attractive. So the fear I have is when the Bentleys of the world or these other places start drawing away people from their big Van Patten 4 or 5 bedroom houses, and those places come on the market for $300,000, and people, young folks, are scooping them up, and that's when we have the potential of more seeing an enrollment piece. Because in this, it's so many of them. If it was only a few, that's one thing, but we're talking about hundreds of houses of that nature.
The only thing that kind of levels that out for the school district is that unlike when a development comes online and hundreds of people move
At the
into
same
the
time.
houses all at one time,
Yeah.
that's one thing. But when we
It could be a
age out,
Yeah.
whether it be to move into a smaller place or a very confined box, and empty the house.
And just something else to consider, and I'm not sure if Dan, if you guys have any information or research on this, is the phenomena also of people taking care of their parents. So you have kids moving back into their homes where they grew up to take care of their parents, and so you're having multiple generations living in the same household. And so that's also interesting phenomena that's going to take place, or we're seeing now. The question is, what's going to be the impact, how dramatic the impact is going to be on the system. But those are the kind of things that we have, because we know the housing stock, a lot of housing stocks are being built now. It's not, it's being designed for high earner professionals. And in many cases, those people don't want to have a lot of kids. In many cases, don't even want to have kids. And so that's not our biggest concern. It's the lower end, good quality volume houses, 25, 30-year-old house, 5 bedrooms, $300,000, great market price to sell.
Just a general demographic, we were just in the paper the other day, Saratoga County, the highest income
Yep.
north of the Tappan
Yep.
Zee Bridge,
Yep.
throughout the second, New York State.
Yep. Interesting times.
All right, any more questions on birth data? All right, so housing data, we got a little ahead of ourselves, but it's an important conversation. So obviously the growth in the last 30, 40 years in Shen has been pretty dramatic. 13,000 homes in 1980 to about 26,000 homes in 2010. We're estimating at this point that by the 2020 census, this district's going to be looking at between 28 and 29,000 homes, which is, we have 27.5 right now. That's not undoable in the next 4 years. The more interesting data on here, not that this data is interesting, but the existing home sales to our conversation is something that's gained our attention at CDRPC. We only have historical data going back to 2014 for the school district itself. But what we can see is that every year the market has improved. More homes are being sold. Their average days on market is declining pretty dramatically from 66 to 43 in just 4 years. The median sale price is interesting. On one hand, increasing sale prices are nice, especially if you're the seller. On the other hand, what is the threshold for, in this case, if we're thinking these are affordable homes for young people to buy, crossing that 300,000 threshold can be a sticking point for many first-time home buyers. I just bought my first house. That number terrifies me.
But you didn't buy it in Shen, so that's why, that's why it terrifies you, because,
I'm just putting it out there. All these numbers.
You buy it here, people ask, piece of cake, come on.
So, but all jokes aside, it is an interesting question to raise, that if these prices continue to
Where's the threshold?
continue to rise at this kind of rate, like from 287 to 305 in just a year, does that, in a good way, slow down the growth a little bit? Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does. We're also very early in this process.
So let me ask you a question then. The home sales, you don't differentiate between new homes, or these are all, in other words, when you say existing homes, you're talking about the last 5 years, the last 10-year-old home, or the 20, 25-year-old homes?
Right, no, we make
You
no
don't-
difference
you don't make
between,
difference, okay.
between 2-year-old homes and
Got you,
50-year-old homes.
got you.
And Gary, what did you say about the incomes north of the Tappan Zee Bridge? Because maybe that can explain why we're tipping.
Saratoga County has the highest average per capita income of any place in New York State north of the Tappan Zee
Okay,
Bridge.
so that could be why it's going
Yeah,
up so
you get
dramatically.
people coming in with the,
All right.
but this is still dirt cheap if you're coming from Westchester County or buying houses here, it's dirt cheap. You get more house and get a better school district.
Different world.
Now, the in-migration from places like Westchester, we have some data on that from IRS tax data. Of course, it's always lags behind by about 3 years, but that would be an interesting thing to look at. How many people are moving into Saratoga County in general from places like Westchester and whatnot? I have no idea what the answer is. It could be significant. It might be anomaly. That would be an interesting thing to look at in general.
Dan, you also look at, in the more detailed report, you look at apartments and what they generate as well, right? And the reason I raise it is, it's particularly around here, in Clifton Park, there's almost a moratorium on apartments. I mean, they're on large numbers of apartments versus Malta, which is the Boston Spa School District, just over 1,000 units underway in the last couple of years. There's been a ceiling on growth here. I think there's been some in Half Moon, but it appears that much of that is picking up some of the empty nester folks as well, or the young folks coming in and not having children.
Right. In general, the historical approach is that apartments, townhouses don't generate many children for the reasons you just stated. Now, we do know anecdotally that these, especially townhouses, are beginning to act in some ways like a starter home. But in terms of trying to extrapolate out from that, if we should use multipliers trying and anticipate the children that will come from those kind of developments, we don't have enough data to make that leap. And more importantly, the activity that we see from new housing construction is not exceeding recent norms. We would only use those multipliers for the townhouses if we saw Clifton Park was going to put in 1,000 new units and they were going to be constructed in the next 3 to 4 years. That would completely change the trend line, and we have to do something different at that point. But activity in Shen is always high, but it's stably high. That makes my life a lot easier, because stable is good, and we can anticipate it that way. But we're just not seeing yet a lot of activity a lot of children come out of these new developments. Now, as you mentioned, Boston Spa has seen a lot more of it. So when I do their projections, that's something that keeps me up at night, is trying to figure out if we're going to start to see a wave. Everyone that does any kind of demographic work is concerned about this issue, but we just haven't seen the expected wave happen yet.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so this is the meat of the report. This is what we're all been waiting for, the actual projections. Now, this year, obviously, 9,828 students. We're projecting a minor decline of 1.4% over the next 5 years to just shy of 9,700 students. By and large, again, as I said earlier, I don't want to draw too much attention to this. By all measurements, that's a pretty slight decline. The 2020 kindergarten class, though, is interesting. This is the class that will be generated from the children that were born in 2015. That was a very small birth class of 572 kids. That will translate to the smallest kindergarten class in recent memory, 515, a decline of almost 100 students from the year before. And as we work our way through the next couple of years, you will see that first grade and second grade are all going to be significantly below the previous year's enrollment. Other than that, the first through 12th proceeds along at a pretty standardized rate. We don't see a whole lot of variation there.
I'm just going to comment on that and just digress out. I mean, when we talk about this, and this will obviously something we'll talk about later into 2018, but the way Shen is structured now, we have a lot of preschools because we don't have full-day kindergarten. So a lot of those parents keep their children in those preschools first, and maybe even some in second grade. So if we ever come to that discussion where we look at land and we start talking about full-day kindergarten, things like that, I mean, that's going to toss a whole cookie in the cookie jar.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're seeing numbers that may drop, but we may see numbers that may go back up.
Well, yeah, if you were to switch from half day to full day, that would be a radical change for these
Well, I mean,
projections.
I think when you see, and it varies. I mean, varies as little as 100 kids in some years and little over 100 in other years.
Yeah.
So we know that there will be a bump up, but it's not a doubling of, and that's the piece that we always have to be cognizant of. So it's not the number all of a sudden, you're going to get 500 more kids. So those are the things that we have to be cognizant of.
Right.
as we look
Right
at it.
now, the district usually sees from K to first grade a multiplier of something like 1.18, something in that vicinity. Now, that's a pretty large multiplier, but that multiplier would come down significantly if you went to full-day kindergarten, because you would see the stronger kindergarten class, so you see less growth going to first grade. So it wouldn't change the projections as a whole down here. It would just change the kindergarten projections.
So Dan, let me ask you, I love your reports, and I carry them, I always carry one with me. So,
Everywhere you go?
yeah, I do, I mean,
Besides here,
any school function, I carry this because people always ask about the enrollment piece. So I looked online at what you had, and then looking at last year, we had this significant decline you showed. On the other hand, looking at your numbers from last year to this year, there's some significant difference in terms of projection
Sure.
upwards.
Well, last year we were projecting increases in enrollment. And then it got changed this year to stable to minor declines.
Well, yeah, but here, so let me give you, for instance, you talk about 2020, 21. Last year your projection was 99.73.
For 21?
No, for 2021,
Okay.
99.73.
Right.
So it's over 200 person difference. How do you explain that? What's,
We had almost something like a 90 child difference from last year's report for kindergarten to this year's report for kindergarten.
but it went down, right?
It went down this year. This year's projections are lower than what we were projecting last year for the same year.
So is your whole basis the kindergarten class? Because you keep coming back to,
Yeah.
kindergarten is going to base your whole piece, but
But there's,
so many variables.
but we have a survival ratio to try to take those into consideration,
Right. No,
that factor.
well, what I didn't go into this year because it always makes people's eyes glaze over. Now I wish I had is how we figure our multipliers from year to year. We calculate the change from first to second, second to third, all the way through. Kindergarten is always a bellwether because it's
In pencil.
it's the first grade, obviously, and for Shen, it's always a small grade that grows significantly between K to first. So it always gets a lot of attention, but we don't base everything off of it. But what changed dramatically was that last year, for 2020, we were anticipating a number of births in like the vicinity of like 600 and I want to say 70, which was low, which continued the trend of declining enrollment or declining birth rates. It just did not take into account that births were going to drop to 572. We don't have a great way of anticipating the year-to-year changes in births. So when that changed so dramatically from 670 to 570, it resulted in a decline of something like 90 kids in kindergarten, which after that we had minor changes throughout the rest of the grade or the rest of the school district, which eventually totaled like 190 kids, which explains the difference. The other difference is that much of the change that you see from last year's report, this year's report, takes into account that this year, while our projections were accurate, we were anticipating 44 extra kids in the subtotal right here.
Yep.
So between that 44 kids that did not appear this year, which is 0.5%, and the missing 90 kids from there, that explains a great deal of the change in enrollment.
Plus, you have the multiplying effect of it as well,
Right.
because if you start with 26 here and then you have a multiplier that makes that 26 to 32 in the next year, and the multiplier effect, so all of a sudden one year of overshooting actually translates more so as you go through the whole thing. That's why each year. So I think Mr. Casey brings another point to the table. That's the reason why sometimes people ask, why do we do this every year? Why not just do this one time and just run with these numbers for the next 5 years? Because if we do, we'll be off significantly from time to time. And so we use the combination of the data to say, okay, generally where are we going overall? And then we start looking at our existing database and reduce what we call just some rollover, just roll over what we have. And then we use some of the multiplier factors that Dan has and say, okay, let's apply that to we start looking at the building by building. So he gives us total, and then we start breaking it down by buildings and say, how does that translate to building? How does that then align with some of the total counts we're seeing here? And kind of do like this kind of cross-referencing to say, are we truly in our ballpark from a budget standpoint or from a class size projection standpoint, things of that nature. So this number is the big picture, and then we try to use that to break it down into smaller chunks.
I have to ask this, I feel like it's a silly question, but I just need to know, what does self-contained mean again?
Special education programs, kids are self-contained in certain classroom programs versus kids who are mainstream.
So the MOVE program would be that too?
Well, it's kind of, we don't have anything that's totally self-contained, to be honest with you. We
Okay.
try to get kids out as much as we can, but some are classified as self-contained.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these would be children on 504 plan?
No.
AP?
These are most severe.
Severe,
yeah,
like
needs kids.
autistic,
Yeah.
okay.
Are the BES in that too?
No, because a lot of BEDS kids get mainstream.
Okay.
That's why it's a small number. When you think about it, we have 1,000 plus special education kids, and 90 of them in this sequence, so it's a very small number. We try not to self-contain this. Try to have kids engage with the curriculum as much as we can.
So Dan, over the period of time, we're looking at a number somewhere at 98, 28, going to 96, 90,
No.
130.
Right, well, you're looking at about 130 kids, about a 1.4% decline.
Okay.
And most of that's going to, we'll get to the next slide.
Yep.
Most is going to occur, again, right there in the 2020 school year. But for the next couple of years, next 3 school years, we project fairly stable enrollment. And for all we know, that, this far out, 2020 might as well be 100 years away. The situation could change dramatically. We could see that wave come in from apartments, or we could see the wave come in from existing home sales. So I always try to explain to any school board that the 4th and 5th year, a lot can change between now and then that we can't even anticipate now. But if everything goes the way we see it going, nothing changes, enrollment stays exactly the same way, you're looking at about 1.4% decline.
Jenny?
I never get this.
What's that
I
again?
swear to God, I never get this. This just never makes sense to me. It didn't make sense last year, and it doesn't make sense this year.
And that's good. It makes sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Will you be here next year?
No, I don't know, man, I don't know.
How I see it is, it's kind of like you're driving through a fog, and your headlights can basically reach out to maybe 2 or 3 years. And anything beyond that, you hope you catch the next year because you've moved another year down the road. But really, you forget about every year you advance enough to get one more year to look further around.
So if we were, Dan, Mr. Casey referred to last year's report. So, and I have all these green reports in my office too, and I kind of do the same thing. I go back and look and try to see if all these, every year we've seen a report that's consistently showing trend up. That's telling me we need to start doing some serious planning, that piece of it. Or, like a lot of, I think Dan pointed out, a lot of school districts are seeing consistently trending down. So if I'm consistently trending down, I'm not building new spaces. And I think that's a lot of school districts in New York are seeing consistently trending down. And so for us to even be stable in an environment where most people are seeing decline, that's a pretty significant thing, much less once in a while we see the tapering up. So kind of look at it from the immediate short term, what the next year is going to look like, but also does that give us some indication of, are we a place that's pretty stable, which I would say right now we are, with the potential of some of this because of all the other factors that makes this region more attractive. Some of what Gary just pointed out, the recent things, the economic piece of it, the economic growth in the region. So those things make that potential of seeing an uptick versus a significant. So kind of look at it that way, almost kind of like reading the tea leaves to see where we headed. Are we going to a place that we at some point going to be boarding up buildings because we don't have enrollments? Are we going to a place where we know that if we build it, potentially they'll come? And I think we're more towards that end of the equation than the other end of the equation. So I think that's what this really, from my vantage point, that's what tells me. So when we look at this stuff, we're sitting here thinking, okay, always high school is the biggest nightmare we have from a facilities perspective, because right now the high school is pretty big. And so we started thinking, we always joked, and enough if I'm not jinxing myself, that if we ever get that wave of 10,000, of 1,000 kids come back from private parochial, that will cause a huge monkey wrench
Joke.
in many ways than not, regardless of the distribution of where the kids are. And so if, just imagine now if these trend lines were showing this wave of 150, 250 kids coming in the system, we already been too late, 2 years, 3 years in planning for that without the system choking on itself because of lack of capacity or having to use spaces differently. So that's where this data comes in for that type of midterm planning. But it also gives us the benefit of when we do our internal analysis and having a comparison point to make sure that we're not out of bounds in some of our assumptions as well.
Didn't we get a more detailed report after this too?
Yeah, so what we'll do,
Something written.
yeah, you're gonna get a green,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, this is just the overall, because we want to keep the meeting fairly brief tonight, so we
Yeah.
we weren't planning on having the questions at all, but Dan was going to be home by 7:15.
Yeah, I know.
I'm actually happy to get the questions. Most boards never question. You didn't question me last year hardly, so.
The one thing, though, that, you know, you talk about what the choke point is, at the high school, I mean, this is where the reality comes in. By the time we get state education department approval, so we've got a capital vote in another couple of weeks, and we had one a couple of years ago, and we still haven't moved those projects. It makes it, without any spare space in the high school, and that trend line going up, it makes it extremely complicated to do the upgrades that you need on what will be a 50-year-old building in a couple of years. So when we're trying to do labs or we're trying to do library, how do we do these things? Keep the operation going, and what can we squeeze in 3.5 or 2.5 months in the
Yeah.
summer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you, Dan. Thank
Oh,
you.
I think 2 more slides.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
good.
You look so comfortable
If
there.
you
I
want me to
thought.
go home, I can leave, but, all right, I'll be quick at this point.
Yes.
I get the message. So K through 5, we're expecting a very slight increase in enrollment this right here, from the next 3 years, that's the result of large birth classes
Yeah.
in 13 and 14.
Okay.
And then after that, that's a small birth class at 15. That's going to drag down enrollment. Enrollment in 6th through 8th has been the most interesting the last couple of years, because we're still projecting out this fairly noticeable incline in enrollment, and that will be, again, the classes that are going to raise enrollment in K through 5 in the next couple of years as they matriculate up. That's them right here. And then for our discussion, we are projecting some relief for the high school as enrollment comes down. Finally, those small classes that are in 6 through 8 right now will be
We'll
working
catch up there, yeah.
So this right here represents something like a 7% decline in 5 years. So
Yeah, so when you look at those 800, if you look at the high school over the next 3 years, you have 800 plus, 800 plus, 800 plus. So when those 800 pluses start leaving and we start getting the mid 700s, all of a sudden those, if you get 40, 50 kids less per grade level, it's a pretty
right.
Significant reduction piece of it. So again, back to Mr. Stevenson's standpoint about the purpose of this, we're doing now, and between Bob and Elizabeth and I, and Bob is doing a lot of the grunt work, looking past 3 years to look out the next 3 years, because we need to create some relief valve opportunities, and I say relief valve opportunities for the high school, not permanent, because in 3 years out, those things aren't necessary. We need to maintain over time. And so when we look at staff, and if he hires someone, you can't say, oh, well, enrollment's went down, sorry, we got to get rid of you, because quite frankly, which we rarely do. Then we talk about how do we shift the staff, and similarly, over the past several years, we created some relief points in the middle school, because we had those big bubbles that were in the middle school. And so now the middle school is starting to see that relief point, now it's in the high school. And so how do we look at that over the course of a 3-year sequence from a 6-12 perspective and try to balance staffing? So that's become a tricky point, because it sounds simple, but it's often not, because it's not like you have a perfect number of 9th graders, a perfect number of 10th graders, and they all have a perfect little set of needs. It doesn't work that way. So we always have to look at how we distribute folks. In some cases, it's not as efficient as we would like, but we know that for every inefficient situation, it creates a potential better situation on the other side of it. So that's the balance piece that we're looking at right now, particularly for high school class size. But another thing, they just don't have the space. So even if we were to say, we're going to distribute people out more to where?
No, I appreciate your comment because I appreciate your comment because going and separate from this presentation, when we talked about, when I sent you that note today, when we start talking about enrollments per grade level, elementary versus middle school versus high school, I think that would be a good conversation to have when we talk about resources and fair and equitable and what is in each school. You know, one school being, and we always talk about Orangen being the largest school, it was built that way to take all these kids. Are we, you know, have we got away from that point that, you know, what is the Orangen makeup or the Shattuck or Chisago or Renda? So I think, thank you for making that comment.
Okay, so, any questions?
I think we've questioned you to death here.
What's that?
I said, I think we shared them all. Cameron will want a copy of this because when he gets in college and he's in a statistics course, he'll want to pull the book out, and you've got a lesson tonight in this, Cameron.
Can I ask Bob one question too?
Sure.
Bob,
Bob, you want to come up?
admins are, when you're looking at enrollment, when you do your piece too, and you do a really good job of that with the numbers, can the administrators see day-to-day numbers? Are they able, do they have dashboards that they can look at? And I know you have that platform, but everybody can see that platform, yeah?
The administrators can
Yeah.
see it.
Okay, all right.
Good. Thank you, Dan.
Dan, thank you. Nice job. So when we get
See
the
you
final
next year.
versions, then?
Yeah, yeah.
What's that?
When we get the final versions?
So, we're still finalizing some of the billing activity. There were some changes in the town's site, came in a little slower than usual, but hoping to have that, proof that go out tomorrow,
Okay,
and then I can get it out to print after Thanksgiving.
no problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
But the projections will not change. Projections are solid at that point, and we're just tweaking some language.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, appreciate it. Bob, was that Nate?
It's a natural progression. We just move right on
Was the
to
presentation Nate?
Yeah.
Okay.
boundaries and
So, as Bob kind of get ready, one of the things, this won't be an extensive presentation. One of the things that I wanted Bob, I put on this for a couple reasons. One, just to kind of refamiliarize the board with the configuration of the district, of how the district is made up in these different cells and why we have it that way. So when we start looking at for instance, middle school. Right now, all the time at the middle school, we're always looking at tweaking boundaries to help kind of balance enrollments across the middle school. It's easy to do because the buses are coming one or two places, over there, over there. Kids come, some walk that way to go to Acadia, some walk that way to go to Gowanus. So it's an easier proposition. And also, if you recall, last year, we had certain cells that we redistributed between CODA and Gowanus to create a balance, actually, it was 2 years ago. And it's easier to do that in the middle school because they go into the same footprint. When we start, and we're going to start looking at this pretty aggressively in February, what Bob is going to just kind of preview here. So consider this as a preview tonight. It's not meant to be anything other than when we start looking at, from an elementary perspective, to see where enrollments are going and what do we need to do to create a better balance in enrollments across some of the buildings. If you remember, the year before last, we had a conversation around Orenda, and Orenda versus Carrigan, and trying to create a better balance in enrollment between those two sister schools. And so we'll be looking at pretty aggressively in February. So I wanted the board to be familiar with this. So once we start getting into some of those conversations, it's not a foreign topic, so to speak, because those conversations could potentially become very real, to say, move this cell in this area, which, you know, when the minute you start doing that, you know, all the gloves are off and people want what they want and they don't care what the other person's not getting.
So we'll start off with this is the enrollment as of 4 o'clock this afternoon. So we start with the elementary schools are at the top in alphabetical order. So Orangen is up here, 698. That's Chango, Carrigan, Octay, Orenda, Shattuck, Scano, and Chisago. And then the 3 middle schools. And then all the way out here is the high school at 3243, which is down 19 students from, I think, opening day, which kind of happens as we go through the year. And some of them are down numbers. I'll just hit the blow up button once, just so that you can kind of just see where the icons sit. You can't read the numbers all that well anymore, but you can kind of see where the icons sit. So and what's interesting here is that when you look at the numbers for the schools, and then you go and start looking at the cells that the district uses to create its attendance zones for catchment areas for elementary, middle schools, then you start looking at the breakdown of the age or grade levels of the kids within the cells. So there are some cells, for example, that may be secondary heavy. There may be some cells that are elementary heavy. Most of the ones, and there's a chunk of cells in there, most of them have a fairly equal blend numerically, except remember that the K-8 cells are about 50%, and the 9-12 cells are about 50%, which is where all the kids are sitting right now in the 9-12 end. So just to kind of give an idea. So that's the current enrollment as of this afternoon. So I pulled this map up, and I'm just going to back it off just for 1 second, again, just to give you a little bit better picture of what the district is. And for those that are unfamiliar with this, the district is divided into 4 quadrants. You have the northeast, the northwest, the southwest, and the southeast. Each of them have attendance cells in them. Each of them have differing numbers. I actually wrote it down so I could give you the exact numbers on the sheet. The northeast up here has 27 cells. The northwest has 26 cells. The southeast down here is 36, and then the southwest is 42 with the most cells. And again, that's the Route 146, and that's the Northway, and that's how we dissect the district and create those 4 quadrants. And then the cells are numbered, and they've been numbered over time. If you actually looked at a listing of the cells, you'll see Northwest 8, and then you'll see Northwest 8A. It's kind of like Exit 8 and Exit 8A. It's, sometimes they've added them. Then I think it's in Southwest. You have Southwest 27, and you have Southwest 27A, and you have Southwest 27B, and then you have Southwest 28. So I'm not sure of the number scheme at one point, except it just kept getting bigger. So any combination of these cells is what we use to make up the elementary schools, and then those combination of cells will be used to make up high school, the middle schools, and of course the high school is all the cells that are in there.
Does each cell contain approximately the same total?
No.
No.
All over the place.
If you want an average, the average is 75.0833, repeating decimal.
So when you think about that, Gary, when you think about the population center, is if you look at the cells in this area, all around what I call what the mega developments are. I mean, so you can have the development across the street from me, probably have 200 plus easily kids in that one development. If you go up to some of the areas out here, you have 4 or 5 kids, where and it's a cell that we had to classify. So when we look at that, for instance, Bob pointed 146 here.
That's 146.
That area, when we started looking at that was the Arenda area we started looking at. That Arenda to Sago area, and then we started saying, okay, certain cells that go in a certain development, so we can look at it, say, whatever, conversation purpose, 100 kids in it. Okay, have 100 kids, we don't always, oh yeah, let's use that one. Well, 100 what age kids? If it's 100 high school kids, we don't want it, because it doesn't help. If we shift that neighborhood, it doesn't help our balance for enrollment. So that's the purpose of kind of breaking down into not only cells, but the composition of it. So we start looking at saying, okay, and go over here, Bob, to Waterford. When we looked at Waterford, that area here, to split between Acadia and Coda, we looked around all those cells and say which cells have enough kids that are either 4th and 5th grade now and 6th grade. So when they're transitioning through over the next 3 years, we know that the change we make will hold for multiple years. Because the last thing we want to do is to take all these kids who are in 8th grade now and drop them into another school, and the next 3 years there's no other middle school age kids in these developments, and parents are like, why did you do that? Because there's no one else going to be coming from middle school. So it makes the process a little bit more exacting, but it also makes it more complicated because you have more information to play with sometimes. Sometimes ignorance is a good thing. But in this case, we have so much information, and we can almost do it to a point where you can literally say how long this change will hold, barring these people moving out. And so we did this when you think about going back 8 years ago, maybe a little bit longer when Lorraine Longworth was here.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time looking at this because we made a commitment that the redistricting should hold fairly well for about 6 years. And now we're beyond that, and it's still holding fairly well. When you think about it, the one factor that we thought was going to see more development is the Vischer Ferry Road side, because they were dropping a lot of houses in that area, and those houses have materialized into a lot of kids. And so that's the one area, this whole equation, that didn't hold as well over the years as we thought would hold as well. And but when you start looking at the housing stock, you probably say, oh yeah, we probably should have anticipated that someone who's buying a house for $600,000 may not have more than 1 or 2 kids, versus in the Scano side or in the other places where you have these huge, so that's the one area that really didn't hold very well. And so we're seeing that effect right now in Tasago, because the housing stock isn't producing, or should I say, you don't have enough kids in that housing area. So that's when we start breaking this down. So part of the reason I want to show the board is that it's just not an arbitrary thing that we do. And so sometimes people accuse us of, oh, well, you guys are just making this, we're not just, throwing a dartboard and say where it lands, that's where we're going to move. We literally look in the cells and say, okay, do we have enough kids? Is it even worthwhile doing it? If it's not, then what's the next cells? And so sometimes you capture several cells, because what you don't want is a bus going through one neighborhood and picking up kids in another neighborhood, and people are like, well, why is this bus? So sometimes we capture many cells just to get enough kids to make the transition worth. And then we have to also then think about what is the transportation impact, because if you go too much, then what does that mean from a routing perspective? And are we crossing buses within same developments? And those are other complications that come into the equation as well, that doesn't make it a neat science, but yet we still have some exacting results. Does that make some sense?
So we looked at, for example, the middle school piece that we did, we were looking to take between 22 to about 30 kids out of CODA and move those students in the future into Acadia. And it did exactly that. It's been doing exactly that for 3 years. However, what we didn't know was that other cells in CODA were going to grow. So while we were literally moving 25 kids out per year from CODA still got bigger with the loss of kids because of the other cells that they had where they had growth, and they were existing homes. So homes had turned over and people would come in with kids, and so that bumped up the other cells. So it didn't negate what we try to do in CODA. It did reduce CODA, but we also were trying to grow Acadia, and it did grow Acadia.
These cells don't really have a direct relationship with transportation routes then.
To some degree, I wouldn't say direct. So the tail isn't wagging the dog in this situation. We look at the numbers and then try to say, okay, what's the efficiency of routing? And if there's some gross inefficiency of routing, we make the modification. So again, going back a number of years, I mean, we had all these huge maps and spent way too many hours looking at this stuff, laying all these maps out, and then at that point was Dave Christopher and his folks come in and say, okay, can we run buses in this so that the buses that are picking up from one building and picking up from another building, they're all taking about the same amount of time to go out, get kids, and come back, because all those buses are going to the next sequence of bus runs. So we had to create some commonalities. Is it perfect? No. That's why sometimes you'll see a bus, sitting by the Fire Road piece for 10 minutes, and somebody say, why is the bus sitting there? Because it'll take them 15 minutes to go back to the bus garage, to come back 15 minutes this way. So we wasted 30 minutes. So you have the 10-minute flex because it's not an exact piece of it. And so those are the kind of things that sometimes people don't understand, that is an efficiency versus the waste of time back and forth and fuel and wear and tear, because it's not perfect, but we still want all the buses to be done with elementary on campus, for example, all about the same time, because they're all going out for the next sequence of runs for middle school. And so transportation is considered to say, is it doable within this window, recognizing there is some flexibility or cushion, if you will, within the windows to deal with the uneventual pieces that you do when you're driving and picking up, and the other factors that come into play. So that's a big part of it. And that's why the boundaries of zoning, we also also try to have natural barriers, if you will, to say, okay, this side of 146 versus that side of 146 versus this side of the Northway. And even some cases, we have some areas of undeveloped land or streams and stuff like that create natural barriers between developments. And so this development is separate from this one. One that we didn't factor, the one that's by the, what's the name of the development right across where you used to live? Clifton Knolls?
I lived in
So Clifton Knolls and Red Hook is the other one that's in the back corner. Like,
Oh, yeah.
So we didn't.
Mill Creek. Yeah.
Mill Creek. So that's a funny one because we kind of saw those as two separate places, and all of a sudden we got approached to do redistricting because Mill Creek, Red Hook, Clifton Knolls, two different places, two different set of housing stock. Little did we know that the backside of that kind of thought they were part of the other development, but yet the front side of that thought this was part of this development, and all of a sudden that became one big piece that, because we were trying to chunk that out to all go to Tasago, and a lot of this go back to Scano. So where's the natural boundary? We started looking at those kind of things, and so, this side of the pond, talking about the Barney Road versus that side of the pond. Something as arbitrary as that, because we had to have some natural boundaries so people can have some sense of why certain things occurred.
So if you're interested, the two largest cells in the school district are Northwest 8 and Northwest 10. They're 346 and 347 students. Those are our two biggest cells. We have cells as small as two
Is that
students.
Chango up there?
Yeah. We have cells as small as 2 students. But again, I said the average was 75.08 repeating decimal 3, which doesn't really tell you a whole lot because we have 346 and then we have 2. So that's that piece of it. The other thing I wanted to show you was this part here. And this is where you really need good eyes.
Very good eyes, yeah.
So I'll tell you that right now, you need really good eyes, but I did bring a little visual for at least this side of the table. So folks, what they're looking at is this. But those are the cells. And there's the Northwest 8 and the Northwest 10. And if you were to scroll down through this, the red line is the average. That's the 70, the number I've done, 75.80833. We have a couple of large cells down in Southwest that are in the 200s, but nothing approaches the two 300s that are out here. So they're huge. And then again, you can see out here, there's a 2 and a 4 and a 6 and a 9. And there's those cells, sometimes there's lots of land and few students in them. And so it's important to know where they are. And then as I had mentioned, the other thing that was important is when you look at the cells, and I'll just make this just a little bit larger, but when I look at the cells, and you all can't see it out in the audience, but some of the board members can see it, those are those same bars, but those bars are color-coded by grade levels. So the high school ones are here, so 12, and it goes all the way down to kindergarten. And then it tells you the number of students. And we can actually, by clicking on it, pull up who those families are, who those students are as well. But so then when we look at those numbers, we want to see, are they elementary school numbers, are they middle school numbers, or are they high school numbers, or are they just equally spread? And some of that would depend upon the housing stock, the age of the housing stock, the size of the housing stock as to what it is. So those are all the kinds of things that we look at.
This, again, was a preview, not meant to end all, and so to kind of put a little closure on this piece of it, Mr. Stevens said she had to go. That's the reason why we don't do this working committee. We do a lot of backroom breaking down, trying to make heads and tails out of details, and don't make political decisions when we talk about what we move, how we move it, because there's so many fine details to it that most people won't appreciate. So again, just to give the board a flavor, that's the intent of this tonight, because we'll be having more conversation in some of this as we move forward.
Bob, can I ask you one question? So I presume that you have good historical data against these cells. So, and I asked the question from the perspective of, bringing the Futures Committee together later in the year, looking at, is there a shift in concentration toward the east, in terms of helping us, informing us as to make decisions over time, and I just heard you say you're talking about by grade level, so we've got a lot of data, right?
But one of the things we're going to do with that, Bill, is overlay once we get better information, overlay housing stock on this map as well. Because we know what we have now, but we also want to know where the growth potential is going. So if someone has 150 houses or whatever in a particular area, we want to say, okay, if that drops into that, that's something we have to be mindful of. So we want to see where is the growth potential going, and is it really going where people make an assumption that it's going. So we'll do some of those kind of things.
I mean, not that I do it, this is the science. I drive through neighborhoods
Yeah, I do
at
too,
different
yeah.
times during the day, and I look and I saw a kindergarten bus coming out in the middle of the day out of one of these neighborhoods. And pretty much you either have senior citizens in this neighborhood or very, very young young couples that don't have children yet. But I saw a kindergarten bus coming out, so I know there was at least one kindergarten on set. So,
Thanks, Bob.
So we'll transition, and I've officially behind on the wager.
You are.
So Dr. Wood is going to talk about some of the, it's just one of these neat things that we're doing. Didn't necessarily need to come to the board because the board approval isn't warranted, but I think it's one of those good informational pieces for the board to have about this. And then we have our last presentation will be some of the stuff that we're doing with community services. So I have to apologize to the ladies in the audience because I promised them that they'll be out of here by 8 o'clock sharp. And, so Mrs. Carmen will buy them all cookies and something tomorrow to make it for it. That's all on Mrs. Carmen.
So, without further ado, we are definitely interested in innovating our spaces. We talk a lot about trying to make sure that we have modern learning environments for our students, and as you know, we have plans underway to modernize our high school East Library, and we will be asking voters to support modernization of our high school East technology and some science rooms across the district, recognizing that part of our responsibility is to make sure that whatever we do as we are in charge of the system for a little while is to leave it in good shape for the folks who come after us. And part of that is a continuous cycle of refurbishing that, and we see that as our responsibility. We also want to make sure that we are providing spaces that are conducive for the highest type of quality of learning, especially spaces that are flexible and interactive and support collaboration. Specifically for this project, we're looking at our Center for Innovative Learning, which is where the vast majority of the professional development for our staff occurs in our district. And I am sure most of you, if not all of you, have been in that space and seen it is well loved and heavily utilized. You'll see that it is in high demand. That is just a screenshot from an average week. During peak times, we have 20 different sessions going on in a week. In fact, it's almost a source of irritation among our leadership that, it's like who can get on the calendar to get certain spaces at the SIL first. And we have a lot of folks coming and going through that space doing wide-ranging work. We are looking at refurbishing the space to make sure that, A, it's due, and B, to say that we would like to be able to have us maybe do a little bit better job with our professional development in terms of modeling what we would like to see in some of our classrooms, to have the space be a little bit easier to reconfigure, to have smaller groups of teachers work in collaborative settings, looking at replacing the furniture with furniture that is on casters for the tables, the task chairs, the overflow seating, and even have a very small amount of comfortable seating for kind of that collaborative sense of group work. I'm sure one of the pieces of feedback we'll hear when we finally do this is, boy, it would have been nice to have gotten more comfortable seating in there or more of those chairs, but it's a start, and it's kind of like it's symbolic of the work that we want to do and the comfort that we want in terms of a collaborative learning environment. So we are looking at future-proofing our learning spaces and including our Center for Innovative Learning in that work. And hopefully within the next couple of months, when you stop by the SIL, you'll notice at least some subtle improvements.
And the biggest debate was what shade of green
Oh, geez.
we're gonna have for the furniture. So we shall see. It's gonna be a surprise. Is it this?
I just ask one question. I think years ago, a lot of what we did in our professional development is we offered to other districts as well, that people would come in. Do we still do that, or we're tied up ourselves, right? Yeah, okay. That's right, company.
Yep.
Thank you.
Wow, that was fast.
That's the motto we set for you, Mrs. Carter.
Be an example.
That's the motto that we have there, and I'm have the
Well, I
clicker.
enjoy
So
spending time with everybody, so, we could spend some more time together now. I'm just really honestly, just want to thank you for the opportunity to present tonight and provide an update regarding community education and community services. And before I just give a brief overview, I would be remiss if I did not introduce the staff and the people that are behind it. Julie Keene, Kim Pottenberg, and Jill Galarno, and Amy Cullen. And Amy's going to present the community services piece of it. You have the clicker, correct? So before we go to the next slide, just providing a very brief overview and update regarding community education services. And over the last few years, we have spent a lot of time really trying to increase our efficiencies in the department and trying to look at how we can improve some of the programs that we're offering and how we can improve some of the way we're doing business altogether. So a quick overview: new instructor network, where we're looking for new classes all the time for community education, a new registration process that we worked on a couple of years ago to eliminate paper. People can still register if they don't have that online system, but we do have most people who are registering for courses are using the online system, which is great. And then also we recreated the brochure, made a new design, cleaned it up, and that particular, you can go to the next one, that particular brochure goes to many homes in the area, but also Julie and Kim, actually Kim has spent a lot of time getting out into the community and putting the brochure in different locations throughout the community to increase some awareness about what programs that we're offering here. And as you can see, the courses have increased over time, and they've worked really hard at creating a variety of courses to really have courses that are diverse, interest for anybody actually, and sometimes we get some crazy requests. Very interesting courses, which we will try to offer and see how that goes. In addition, we also have the driver education program, which falls under the community education piece of it, and you can see there that annually we have about 280 students, typically between 270 to 290 typically, who end up taking driver education for the year. So that also comes out of the community education office. Moving forward, we're looking to have an evaluation tool in place to evaluate the program and some of the courses so we can get some feedback to see how things are going and to ensure that we're meeting our customer needs. And continue to really try to offer the diverse programming at a low cost, basically. Turn it over to Amy to talk about community services.
We've been in existence since 1996, and some of you may remember back in 96 when we started the Community Services Office, we began really just to manage gym time because gym time is in so much demand. But really over the last 20 years, we've grown exponentially, and we basically now serve 90 plus community groups as well as countless school groups and educational programs within Shen. So it's really kind of been an exciting time over the last 20 years because we've expanded so much in terms of what our office does. We do a lot of the scheduling now, pretty much all of the scheduling at high school East and the middle school, the pool, the turf when that came on, and so we've kind of embraced a lot of increased scheduling and a lot more events. As you can see, they've grown from 9,000 to 27,000. So it's really been an exciting thing for us because we really have a lot of hands-on in terms of increased communication with the community. We do a lot of communication via email, website, apps, social media, that kind of thing. And we also hold meetings with the community and maintain a regular communication with them throughout the school year. We also increased our scheduling over the summer and have done a lot of work with the school programs over the summer and took over the scheduling for the summer programs as well. We're working now on continuing to increase the communication, but also to make it more efficient. And moving into, the future, we want to minimize the amount of paper that's involved with scheduling and make it even easier on our community groups and our school groups to be able to reserve facilities, make it quicker and less effort in terms of extra paper and that kind of thing. So we're looking at a new scheduling database that would increase the ability to go online to schedule. Instead of putting in a building use form and waiting for it to go through the whole process, we would be trying to do everything online, less paper, and quicker response time. So that has been very well received, and people are kind of waiting for that. And so as we move toward that this year, we have gone to a more overall general agreement in terms of use of facilities and adding a lot of, and changing a lot of different spaces for people in response to what they want. So that has worked out very well. We also have kind of been ahead of the curve in terms of facility use fees. Back 20 years ago, we were charging facility use fees and kind of separated out from the general fund and covered our expenses. Over the last 20 years, we've really gone over and above in covering our expenses, as well as replacing equipment and helping maintain the facilities that the facility users use in the evenings. And that's worked out very well. So as I said, moving forward, we're going to be trying our best to become even more efficient in terms of how we schedule the buildings and respond to the community needs and the school group needs as well. We also do the Friends of Shen volunteer program, and we try to monitor and keep track of all the different volunteers that are in the Shen community, and we have been working together with a couple of retired Shen employees to increase the number of retirees that are volunteering in our Shen buildings. And we also want to look in the future at being able to increase the number of college students, and perhaps some of the community services courses that other, the local universities and colleges have, we can incorporate in volunteering in our buildings as well.
Amy, can you, the number 27,000 in a year is off the charts. I mean, it's just beyond, you start dividing that up by the number of days that, that typically used. So what's the range of those things? Is it use of a field? Is it use a dance class, doing their recital?
An event equals a particular activity in a particular room at a particular date. So a particular specific program might have several different rooms on one date, or they might be recurring every month. We have all different kinds of groups, from youth sports to drama. It also involves the school groups as well, so it's not just solely community. It's
Naomi's right up there on your list, right?
I was actually going to say, I'm so impressed with how fast you can get back to me, and I'll say, I need a cafeteria, I need something for about 50 people on this date, where can you put me? And it's pretty quick. And also with the recurring dates, and now hearing these numbers, that's really impressive. Thank you. Whatever you're doing it well.
It helps to have some experience. I've been here 21 years, and so I kind of know the buildings in and out. Once in a while, I'll have somebody ask for something, and my memory goes back about 15 years, and when, Kodo was a different building, and we didn't have the turf field, and so sometimes I have to go, wait a minute, okay, we're in 2017, and these are the buildings. But it does help to have that background, I think.
I also like doing, I'm not saying I'm avoiding doing it with the individual buildings, but I like going to you and then you distribute it out, because if you have to make a change, it's one-stop shopping.
Yeah.
If you go through each of the buildings, you have to go back to that building. And because I'm working in different buildings, it's actually harder now. It's easier to go through you.
Right.
And then you get back to, it's just amazing. I love it.
We do a lot of communication with custodial staff, with security staff, with the administration in each building, as well as the clerical staff. And it helps because we kind of know where we need to go in terms of whatever your request is. So if you're coming in and you want to hold a certain event, first we have to make sure that you are following the policies that Shen and the Board of Ed has laid out, everybody is treated equally the same, so everybody follows the same policies, and we track the insurance certificate also to make sure that Shenda is not going to be liable in case anything happens. We do all the billing, and so we make sure that all those things are all in place before we figure out, okay, what's the availability, that kind of thing. So we know kind of who we're communicating with, and we collaborate a lot with, especially the custodial staff, to make sure that that's all set up.
And they're also coordinating the volunteer forms. So I send her the volunteer form, and she, like for the middle school, for the FLL program, she distributed to the 3 principals. So, I mean, that just, so it just streamlines, it makes it easier. It's like I said, it's one-stop shopping. I loved it. I mean, this year was the easiest so far. I don't completely understand how you're doing all this behind the scenes, but
That's not secret,
But as,
I was going to say, I really want to stop in your office. Figure out how is that working?
so as Naomi says, she's not sure what you're doing, but keep on doing it.
Yeah, keep on doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, ladies.
So I think that brings us to a close. Thank you. That's a very informative evening. Before we adjourn, just want to remind the public of a couple things. One, our next meeting is on Tuesday, December 5th. That same day is the day that we have the public vote on 2 resolutions. Resolution 1, I think, is the sale of the surplus property to the town of Clifton Park. And the second resolution is a capital proposal of about, I think it nets out about $18 to $20 million. That covers things that we even touched base on tonight, including upgrading labs and
Technology
space,
classes.
technology, outdoor traffic flow, a giant thing. It's one of those things that you don't pay much attention to when these numbers just keep creeping up, but when they creep up at the high school, of course, everybody wants a car, and everyone a parking place, and we need to get safe access in and out. So all that is in there. We encourage people to show up and vote on Tuesday, December 5th from 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. We'll hope to finish the meeting in time that we can walk from here to the gymnasium and see the final vote count. So with that, could I have a motion for adjournment? Bob, second. Naomi. All those in favor?
Thank you.
Meeting's adjourned.
Cameron, how did you make out on Saturday?
Oh, it was great.
You certified?
Yeah.
Okay. I know you're